There was a man who picked up a stick. And he used this stick to start to protect his land, his sacred land, the sacred territory, the spiritual territory that had been established. He started to wave this stick around. And English officers came and he waved the stick to push these English officers away, to protect the sacred place. This story is a story that's happened in generation after generation in different ways. On this day, 200 years ago, two priests arrived from Ireland, Father John Terry and Father Philip Connolly. And they came to serve the community here. And they were given a little piece of land which then became a little piece of sacred place for Christians here in Sydney. We refer to it now as St Mary's Cathedral. And after a short period of time, the English officers came and they wanted to take some of that land away. They said, no, we want some more. They want some back for the English, is what they said. And this priest, Father John Terry, picked up a stick and he started to wave it at the officers to push them back from the sacred land, from the sacred place. History tells us that Father John Terry, he grew up in a place called Cork in Ireland. He came here to interact firstly with those who'd been brought as prisoners, as convicts. But he didn't just stay with that. He wanted to establish and connect with the local Indigenous community. And he became a great friend of the local Indigenous people here. He became friends with them. He learnt their language. He spoke with them and he advocated for them and for their sacred rights within this land. He, at times, even as a priest, picked up a stick and did as Jesus would have done as the Good Shepherd. He protected the land and he protected the sacred land. Earlier this week, in my own parish, where I'm the parish priest at Cronulla, we remembered the 250th anniversary of the arrival of the English when they came on April 29 in 1770. Where they came, I think, as John would have said in our Gospels, they came almost like thieves in the night to steal and unfortunately even to cause harm. And there were people there, Indigenous people who were there, who were the gatekeepers, who picked up sticks to defend the sacred land. And that's part of being a Christian. That's part of being the Good Shepherd. Sometimes we have this idea of the Good Shepherd sort of almost like something out of a farm. It's sort of, the fluffy sheep, nice lambs. The reality of what it was like to be a shepherd at the time of Jesus, it was hard. Part of the job of the shepherd was to push the sheep in the right direction. And sometimes they'd use a stick and they'd hit them up the backside and push them in the right way. Sometimes the role of the shepherd, was to pull the sheep back in when they've got in the wrong direction. But one of the courageous things of what the shepherd does for the sheep, is to use the stick to defend the sheep and to defend the sacred place where the sheep are. And part of the role of the shepherd is to get that stick and sometimes to use it as a weapon against the wolves who come to kill. Jesus Christ comes as the Good Shepherd. And the Good Shepherd is one, yes, who looks after the sheep, who guides the sheep in the right ways, but sometimes the role of the shepherd is to lay their life down to protect the people and to protect the land. John tells us in the Gospel that Jesus is the gate and the gatekeeper, which is a really when you think of it, a gate. But that's what Jesus is. And when we're protecting the people, we're protecting the sacred lands, we're actually being the Good Shepherd. 250 years ago, just earlier this week, unfortunately, the English shot at the people who were the gatekeepers. They were being the shepherds of their community. 200 years ago, Father John Terry, not too far from here, at St Mary's Cathedral here in Sydney, was there protecting the sacred piece of land that they'd been using to celebrate Mass. The English wanted to take more back of it. He said, no, push back. The English didn't react in the same way they reacted 50 years earlier. They didn't shoot at Father John Terry because they respected that Father John Terry spoke clearly, he spoke courageously, and he spoke with love. And as shepherds, we're all called to do that too. To communicate love, to communicate goodness. But a part of doing that is to actually be the gate and the gatekeeper. The ones who help people to stay safe on their sacred lands. I think of all those before us who've kept this land safe, who've kept the culture safe for the Indigenous people. Some of those were great Indigenous leaders, and some of them were people like Father John Terry. He went to the governor here in New South Wales, who didn't want to recognise any support for the Indigenous. He said, this is wrong. These are human beings. These are creatures of God, and they should be looked after. And he went to the governor, and he convinced the governor that they needed to provide some assistance. It's the first sign of the English actually deciding to provide assistance or support for the Indigenous. He then went back again and said they need some housing, they need access to medical care as well. That was Father John Terry. In our Australian history, some of the great people have been Indigenous, who've helped be the gatekeepers, the ones who've protected culture, who've protected the people. Some of them have been people like Father John Terry, and you probably know people like that yourself, who might not be Indigenous, but understand that we are people, all of God's people, and that we're called, and I'm called, to humbly walk on this land, not to come as an invader, not to force my way in, but to be welcomed in. And that's what Jesus does for us. Jesus is that gate. We go through Jesus and we find eternal peace. Jesus welcomes us in. But occasionally, Jesus also, when it gets difficult, like we know in our own history, sometimes Jesus needs to stand up and say, hey, that's not right. Or sometimes Jesus, even with us and even with me, I need to be nudged in the right direction. Like a shepherd sometimes nudges the sheep, pushes them in the right way. I need that too. And you probably need that as well. That's being the shepherd. Think today about some of the people who've been your shepherds in your communities. Maybe they're people who we think, oh, they're wearing fancy outfits. Oh, well, they're the shepherds. Or we refer to them as priests, or they might be the shepherds. But those 250 years ago who were being the gatekeepers, they were shepherds as well. Sometimes the history doesn't always write it that way, but I think it should. They were being good shepherds. They were protecting sacred land. They were protecting sacred people. They were protecting sacred culture. Today, as we think of the Good Shepherd, let us recommit to our relationship with Jesus, that we come to Jesus and that we learn how to be Jesus in the world. And part of that is to be courageous. Part of that's to be the gatekeeper for our culture. And part of that occasionally is that we might need to pick up a stick or some other, perhaps maybe not a stick these days, pick up something to be able to defend what is right. Father John Terry picked up a stick, pushed the English back. The Indigenous out at Kamei, out at Kurnell, as it's now referred to, they picked up sticks to defend their land. How are we going to defend and protect and to be the good shepherds today? That's our prayer, I think, for today.